Look at prolonged energy market volatility, triggering higher inflation, currency pressure, economic slowdowns across developing nations, of course, of which we are one in terms of Pakistan particularly. How is this, going to have in terms of long-term effects? And can we potentially put a timeline on it, realistically speaking? Asad, can you hear me?
Yeah, I thought you were asking. Yeah, definitely. Like in terms of every technology adaptation, and it is not the normal word, as we say. We need to keep an eye on like our own mix of energy resources, and similarly, other countries are also like realigning their policies as well. So, but at the end of the day, like operational resilience, I say I would like to use that term, because one way or the other, if this situation or this situation gets prolonged, or even like the countries like China, Russia, so the prolonged instability is more of an economic risk than a benefit to all these countries. But like it's but most of those countries which have a yeah.
When you say operational resilience as a term, is it from what it means to a layperson, or to understand it, how much of operational resilience do developing countries have, in your opinion?
Yeah, that is what I was like coming towards. Basically, when we talk about operational resilience, it starts with the choice of your fuels or your power generation sources, capitalizing on your indigenous sources, and similarly like looking into other ways and means of diversifying your industrial base. Those sectors which rely heavily on like fuel oil, you have to come up, like as Pakistan is focusing on like increasing its software exports and things like that, which are not directly relying on the disruptions or the commodities or hard to abate sectors, which typically rely on the fuel oil. So I think like this diversification is something which every country has to look into from its own perspective. And this is where the energy security of every country is getting its new definitions from. So I think like in terms of climate change adaptation, when we talk about operational resilience there as well, and in terms of this new mitigation thing, when we talk from the terminologies of climate change, so under the mitigation, this operational resilience is something in terms of we use this term in terms of disasters. So we can say that this is a disaster-like situation in which we are at the moment, and we need to come up with our own contingency plans in order to tackle the situation.
Right. Thank you so much, Asad. Thank you for joining us. Like you said, of course, operational resilience and sources, developing countries need to work on them themselves. Thank you so much for joining us. Moving on, the future of US-Israel relations. We have with us Sardar Masood Khan, former ambassador to US, UN and China, also former President AJK. Thank you for joining us. Sardar sir, we've spoken about US and Israel from time to time in terms of the role that Israel has traditionally had as far as the US policy is concerned. Their friendship, their close relationship. First of all, very, clearly, is it thawing the relationship? Can one say that of late?
Both the countries are joined at the hip, as a matter of fact. They are very, very close to each other. They are strategic partners. They are inextricably linked to each other. And their armed forces work closely with each other. So do the political leaderships. So from time to time, you hear these noises about anti-Israel sentiments in the United States. That's tactical. I mean, coming even from President Trump, some days ago, a very tense conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu was publicized. But the question is, why was it publicized? It was publicized to reassure the Americans, because Americans, there was this increasing trend of criticism against Israel's outsized influence in the United States of America. But I think that the fundamentals haven't changed in America's foreign policy or Israel's strong influence throughout Washington, not only the policy circles, but the entire electoral landscape.
Fair enough. So it was something interesting that was mentioned yesterday while we were discussing relationships between U.S. and Israel. Was that it is significant that the conversation, the telephonic conversation, famous telephone conversation by now of President Trump being displeased with Netanyahu, was leaked. Is this significant in your opinion? Not that it happened, but the fact that it came out the way that it did.
Well, I think that this was shared by the White House officials with Axios, and they broadcast the news. And as I said, that President Trump wanted to signal that he was his own man, that he was taking decisions, that he was in the driving seat, and he was not being prompted and prodded by Netanyahu. So this is the signal that he wanted to give to MAGA Republicans and also Democrats and the American people at large. But let me tell you that two or three developments have taken place in the wake of this war, in the aftermath of this war. I mean, we are still in this war mode, but there's a ceasefire of sorts which prevails right now. One thing that there has been backlash in America, especially amongst liberals, also MAGA Republicans are questioning American taxpayers' money being spent to support the initiatives taken by Israel for the Middle Eastern politics. And the second is that you must have seen some reports coming out of Washington. This is very uncharacteristic and unusual. At this very sensitive moment, they are publishing reports about Israel's increasing espionage of American defense officials, also their bureaucrats, and also the top negotiators, particularly Mr. Steve Witkoff and some Pentagon officials. They are also trying to, the reports allege that Israel is trying to spy on President Trump, as a matter of fact, to know what he's going to do in regard to the proposed deal between Iran and the United States. This is unusual, but Israel's stranglehold in the United States is quite stout, and it would not suffer, I think, in the short run from these kinds of either leaks or the kind of backlash you see amongst the masses.
But is it also, do you think that Washington trying to distance itself from all that was being said, that this is not what there were voices in the U.S. and I think we've spoken about this about whether this is a U.S. policy or Israel's policy. So there is this conscious effort by Washington to distance itself from what is Israel policy or what is coming directly from Tel Aviv, right?
The policies of the United States and Israel are complementary. They reinforce each other. And I think that even today, President Trump has said that he's delinking Lebanon from the Iran-United States deal. What does that mean? That Israel can continue to mount attacks not only in the south of Lebanon, but also south of Beirut, which had been publicly prohibited by President Trump. And in a manner of speaking, Netanyahu had accepted that direction from President Trump. But now he's demonstrating, and Netanyahu's cabinet ministers are demonstrating, that they are above the law or above any understanding that they might have reached with President Trump. So we have to understand the depths of this relationship And I think that right now, before the eyes of President Trump, Israel is rewriting strategic reality in the Middle East, particularly in its immediate neighborhood. And it has neutralized, Israel has already neutralized many Arab countries or the Gulf nations in its favor. So I think that, and
Sardar Sahab, we talk about the popularity. I'm going to interject. We talk about, the fact that it seems that the U.S. presidency at this time, is under pressure. In terms of the popularity of the U.S. president and his, is it going to, how much of it, let's phrase it that way, is influenced or is due to hit this close association or following of the policies that are coming from Tel Aviv?
As I said, that this has some marginal impact on America's political configuration and associations. I'd say that they are still co-dependent, and well, there are differences. I mean, you can have differences within a government amongst different departments. So I think that one should not exaggerate those differences that you hear about between the two countries. But I think that there's no strategic disagreement between them. What the Americans are resenting, this overreach by Israel. I mean, they've been trying to barge into security meetings in Pentagon and other offices, and they think that they can't be questioned about anything. So, because after all, the United States is the superpower, the sole superpower, as they like to call themselves. So I think that they want to set some limits. But that being said, the relationship between the two is very close. And you talked about the background.
I think that's something very significant. You've just said that maybe they want to put limits on this relationship, but they do have a strong relationship. I want to talk about Lebanon also. As far as Lebanon emerging as a key link in regional diplomacy, we also know that you've just mentioned Iran has made a Lebanon ceasefire condition. You've just said that what the U.S. has said. How do you expect this to pan out, and how do you expect this to take root as far as the negotiations themselves are concerned?
This would continue to be a spanner in the negotiating process. And even if there is an agreement between Iran and the United States, I'm sure that Iran would take steps to scupper it in many ways. And in fact, it has already erected some barriers, like, for instance, this President Trump's hesitation not to release Iran's frozen assets. This partly comes from Tel Aviv. Also, about the nuclear deal. Of course, President Trump has identified it as a goal, but Israel has spelled out the priority. The priorities are total destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment or uranium enrichment infrastructure, and taking out nuclear stockpiles, taking them out of Iran to the United States or to any other country. So I think that there's unanimity between the two countries, Washington and Tel Aviv. But there would be nuances, of course. President Trump would like to assert himself. To what extent he's willing, or to what extent he can pull it off, is an open question.
Sardar Sahab, Lebanese Army Chief General Hakel, and the fact that he's traveled to Pakistan, the visit itself. Of course, it comes amidst Pakistan's growing role, mediatory role that we know of, we've seen. The timing also has drawn attention because Washington insists, like you said, Lebanon negotiations should remain separate. How do you look at this visit, and do you think that there can be perhaps a change in that condition? How do you look at that, and the visit particularly at this time that has happened?
Pakistan is pursuing a multi-pronged strategy to salvage the negotiating process. this mediatory process. And you know that our interior minister is in Tehran, and he's carrying a message from the Prime Minister of Pakistan and also from Field Marshal Asim Munir. Now, this is one prong. The other prong is that Pakistan is pursuing a multi-vector diplomacy. Well, it demonstrated that within the region, and Field Marshal Asim Munir has invited the Chief of Army Staff of Lebanon, Mr. Rudolf Heikel. And what is the significance? The significance is that Pakistan as a mediator has realized that even if there's a breakthrough between the United States and Iran, the situation in Lebanon could really undermine the whole process. And therefore, it is very important to consult them, have a common understanding of the situation, and to stabilize the situation in Lebanon. Well, I mean, my apprehension is that in Lebanon, probably most probably the situation, the status quo would continue. I mean, Israel would continue to occupy the southern part of Lebanon, even if there is a ceasefire or even if there's an agreement between the United States and Iran. And that's a terrible situation for the Lebanese government, the Lebanese armed forces, who also want to take full control of Lebanon and Assad, Hezbollah, which Iran is not ready to countenance or permit. So this complicates the situation, but Pakistan, as a good faith mediator, is trying to resolve all these issues and whatever riddle or a new conundrum presents itself, Pakistan proactively tries to resolve it. So you'll have to see it in that context. Pakistan's role as a mediator has grown, as a matter of fact, starting from communicating messages and trust building. It has morphed into something how shall I say, regional security mediator or regional security provider.
When we look at, you've mentioned, of course, Mohsen Naqvi's visit to Iran also, and the Interior Minister, of course, met with Abbas Araghchi also when he's been in Tehran. There are reports that he carried an important message from Field Marshal Asim Munir to Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. In terms of this and the reports that are coming, the Prime Minister's, provided special instructions related to Iran-US discussions. And of course, like you said, the role that Pakistan is playing has increased from just, of course, the mediatory role to perhaps more. There's also reconciliation. There's also perhaps, bridging the gap between these two nations. When we look at what's happening, do you think that there are chances of some good news coming very soon? What are your thoughts on this?
Pakistan has delivered good news to Washington several times, and it has given good news to Tehran also. What happens is that after the good news have been exchanged in the past, then the domestic constituencies' interference or criticism kicks in. And that spoils the whole thing. I mean, you would recall that when a draft memorandum of understanding was delivered to Washington, President Trump very enthusiastically embraced it. But then there was a backlash from the prominent hardline senators of his own constituency. And so he had to moderate his response to Iranian proposal. And then gradually he started stiffening his position. Similarly, Tehran doesn't trust the United States fully. And therefore, they also, when they see that America is dragging its feet and that it is adding new caveats and qualifications for the acceptance of a memorandum of understanding, then they also not only show their military muscle in one form or the other, but at the same time, they invoke new conditionalities. So this is the dynamic. In the midst of this, Pakistan continues to strive for an early understanding between the two sides. And the two sides, let me add, are very close to an understanding. And therefore, I mean, it's our hope that beyond these optics, public optics, and semantics that they have become captive of, they should, both sides should demonstrate political will to deliver peace to the world, economic stability to the world, and relief to all the nations and all the citizens of the world.